So glad to see you all. We want to talk a little bit about Unix-related stuff within the terms of PowerShell. And first of all, we thought we should come here as a couple to give you the full information. So my name is Thorsten Butz, and this is...
my name is Bielawski.
So somehow we have a feedback here. So
yeah, it's definitely me.
So go away, Bartek. I want to tell you a quick story how I met Bartek for the first time. Back in 2015, I was a part of the Windows PowerShell conference in Essen. Maybe the one or the other was there too. It was more or less my first contact with the PowerShell community because I happen to be an admin and I'm doing this for quite a long time. But PowerShell embraced me and I thought there is a certain necessity to meet all the people that do the sophisticated stuff. So I applied for the conference, and to be sure that they will give me the chance to speak there, I thought about what can I do, what is the most special, extraordinary, no one else does that.
Yeah.
And I found out that has to be OMI, and using Windows remoting to Linux machines, and on top of that, desired state configuration. Please remember, 2015, it's ages from what we have now. So I was very lucky because I got the chance to speak there, and then I met Bartek for the first time, and all of a sudden, I recognized he's talking about OMI, desired state configuration, and classes, and it was ludicrous. And then I had to make a decision. I thought, even I compete with Bartek, or I try to love him and we share our knowledge. And what he did, it was completely unfair because he used that nice drawings from his daughters, from his children.
Yes.
And I thought, there is no chance, I can never compete with that. So I'm very glad that we found together, so we meet here again and again.
Yes.
And now you have two people that you have to listen to. And the story goes on.
Yeah, because in 2017, you've probably been here, at least I recognize some of the faces. We had a really nice chat together with Thorsten and Joey about the future of PowerShell on Linux. Sorry for the echo, I'm not sure I can do anything about the feedback, but that's not really, let's not focus on that one. So, because Thorsten is author of a really nice podcast, and he actually does a lot of nice conversations with people. That day, he actually invited me and Joey to talk about, generally about our past experience, about what we did with computers in general, but also with command line and Linux experience and where we come from. And it was really, really nice. So I strongly recommend you try it and check this out. But generally, it was apparent that, yeah, next year we have to do something together as well. Maybe not just talk to each other in the small room, maybe talk to the bigger audience in the bigger room.
Yeah. I can really recommend this, not because it's my podcast and I recorded it. It's about the content that they delivered, and it's up to date. You will listen to that, and you will say.
Smiling Joey here.
Yeah. So, but we might think that it might match, but I think we haven't yet delivered the proof.
Yeah.
So before we start, it's late in the evening, so I guess we need a little bit of fun. So first of all, let's prove if we really match together. And I thought, how can we try that? We could try that challenge. So first question, what was your first computer?
So my first computer was Commodore 64. Anybody had used that as a first computer? Well, it was my introduction to programming as well, because my tape broke, the tape reader, and I had to do something with this thing that was lying on the desk, so I decided to program with it. What was your first computer?
Yeah, it's exactly my age, but I refuse to work with computers, so I really don't like it. We just did the gaming stuff, and I came in touch with computers on another level during my university time, And then it was Intel PC 286 with MS-DOS, so the usual stuff. But I could have seen a lot more stuff if I would have been interested a little bit earlier. So, okay, not a real match. And we tried the second one. What was your professional OS?
So, regardless of whether I like it or not, my first professional operating system that I had to work with was Windows 95. And at the time, I was actually very strong on the Linux. Exactly. So, at the time, I was actually very much involved in using Linux. So when I was told to run Windows 95 and do something about it, I felt like this. What was your first operating system? Maybe yours were professional.
I was a lucky guy back in those days because it's done by accident. My first professional operating system was Sun Solaris. And we used to work on FreeBSD machines. I was back then employed by an internet service provider. So yeah, that was a lucky hit, right?
Yeah, that sounds like a professional operating system.
Yeah, but later on that changed. So not a real match again, but we have one more. Your favorite editor?
So it depends. So if you're talking about Windows, I'm a PowerShell person, so it's ISC. I know it's not very Buzz and very well taken now, because I should say VS Code, it's not the case. But when it comes to other operating system or generally something cross-platform, I always opt for VI or Vim. How about you?
Perfect match. VI because it's built in, it's everywhere. And ISE, PowerShell ISE, because it's built in, it's everywhere. I do like Visual Studio Code, but I'm an admin and I can't install software at my customers on a daily basis. So I guess that's a good match. And finally, your religion?
My religion, well, I'm Android user generally, and you?
iOS. Shall we go ahead? Or shall we stop now? Okay, one match is good enough, right? Okay,
yeah.
Let's try that.
Don't forget about Opera. So our favorite browser for both you and me is Opera.
Ah, yeah, okay, sorry.
So,
yeah,
one more match.
Sorry. But now let's get to the content. We want to talk a little bit about PowerShell Core, and what makes it a little bit different is that you heard that before, but we do not know that in advance. So, just like you do, we go to the conference and we learn a lot of things, and during the first 2 days, we heard of many things that we also could have tell you, but first thing is, maybe you have not listened to this session where it was mentioned. And the next thing is that we can change that. So we want to emphasize the things that you have not yet heard. But again, we want to talk primarily about PowerShell Core on Linux. We want to talk especially about remoting. And what Joey actually described on a high level, you will see that completely right now, hopefully. And then we want to do a little bit more sophisticated stuff if you're awake then, and come to something beyond the CLI. We'll see that Bartek will take over then. So let's see. Let's start with that. My first experience with PowerShell Core on Linux was actually on a Raspberry Pi. Because I always thought that since Raspberry Pi exists, it's the perfect Linux, it's the perfect machine. You just grab the operating system, everything works. So I really can encourage you, use whatever you like, but a Raspberry Pi is a perfect starter. And in terms of PowerShell, it's super easy. Just these lines, just tested last week. Gorgeous thing if you use Raspbian. And you can do stuff like that. You see that here. This is just a screenshot. And this is exactly what you saw in code right there. So Raspberry Pi is a perfect starter. PowerShell Core is the future. Is it useful today? I just talked to that with Jeffrey Snover. Hello, Jeffrey, again. I would summarize that it depends on what you want to do. I might well think of many job roles where there is no necessity today. But on the other hand, there are multiple useful things that you can do, and we want to show you a bunch of that. Yep. PowerShell core, generally, you know that all. I think I can do that really quick. It's supported on many Windows versions. It's supported on macOS since Sierra, the last 2 operating systems, Sierra and High Sierra. And you can just zip it if you want it, unzip it, run it, and you can run multiple versions side by side. You know that, I guess, already from the other talks. But there is one missing thing. It's supported on many operating systems, but there are issues, and I will come back to that later. You have to find out that using PowerShell core on Linux is not exactly the same than using on Windows. And there are multiple things that are different, tiny things, but the tiny things are always the things that nag you. So for example, of course we have case sensitivity on Unix, but that does not apply to commandlets, and it doesn't either apply to parameters. But if you, for example, run a script, you see that here, and you forget about that, because you're used to that does not matter, then the script won't run, and you see this thing here. So keep that in mind. There are lots of examples where you can run into trouble. Sometimes you want to use stuff like ls, wget, curl, and I don't want to judge that. I guess the general opinion is that these tools are very, very sophisticated, very mature on Linux, and it does not make any sense to replace it with invoke rest method or something like that. So the alias that exists on Windows do not exist on a Linux. And I guess if I do a future prediction, I would say aliases is not a good idea, built-in aliases. So we have a little bit of trouble, and we have to get away from that. What I want to show you now in the first part is that how you can set that up, and including, because this is the real magic, OpenSSH support. I will do this with a long-term servicing branch of Ubuntu. I will come to that later on, why I chose that. And you might have got the idea that it is super easy. From my perspective, it's not so super easy. There are really some glitches you will find, and I guide you through that. Passwordless login is boring because it's the same thing that you ever do on Linux, but if you do not know that, that might be of interest. And then we do a little bit more in terms of REST APIs and stuff like that. So let's simply start with the first thing. So what I have here is a Linux box and a Windows box. And of course, you know testnet connection. You could also use nmap if you're on a Linux box, and I just have to find out if SSH is already ready to use on Linux. Generally it is, because when you set up, you click the SSH daemon, and then you can use that. And what I need now is, of course, an SSH client. So, and as you can see here, I do not have it because this is a plain Windows box, just simply it's installed the way it is. So first of all, we have to get SSH client and SSH daemon. So let's find out how that works. You don't have to read that whole script, that's not necessary. I just show you that I'm not cheating here. This is exactly what you have to do, and you will find the scripts within the slides and within the download that we provide on GitHub. And so you have to try that out. If you wait a week, there will be a new release, so of course you have to hurry up, or you have to simply use some customization in terms of another release is set up and stuff like that. What you see here is I download and I unzip the OpenSSH file. And after that, there is no firewall policy in place or stuff like that. You see that in line 27. You have to configure that on your own. There is no MSI that does the magic for you. I could also install from the built-in capability. You might have done that already, but if you listen to Joey, Joey will tell you this is not the current one. Use this one. So I stick to that, and this should be the current thing that you can download. So after that, you have two daemons, two services, as we refer to that in Windows. They are both stopped, so I have to start them. I have to take care that they start again. And now, the bad thing, you do not want to provide the full path to the executable, so you have to change your path, your environment variable. And I do that, and now I have to log off, and I do that real quick. So logging on again gives me SSH, so I just installed the server and I installed the client, and I can use the client to attach me to the built-in functionality that's already there in a common Linux operating system. I changed the color. As you can see here, the command line in the back is a plain DOS prompt, a command prompt, and I do not use PowerShell in my first attempt. I use the plain SSH command. And this is a machine. It's asking for the key, of course, you know that, I guess. And now I'm on the machine. I do not have to configure anything on Linux. So first step done, I got SSH on my Windows computer. But there is more to do. If you want to use PowerShell, you have to keep in mind, I hope you already heard that, I will repeat that. This does not work with the full CLR PowerShell. Take a look at that. You do not have a parameter host name. And that's the most important point. You will maybe sometime in the future, but right now you will not use the Windows PowerShell as you used it before. You have to use PowerShell Core. So saying that, I have to install PowerShell Core on the Windows box first, and then I will do that on the Linux box. So we'll see that. It's downloading. I can type right fast, yeah? Great. And I'm downloading, and there you have an MSI. As you can see here, line 19, I'm simply installing from the MSI. This is what you, I guess, have seen yourself. So this is the current version, and now let's try if I can attach this machine to the Linux box with PowerShell. And this is enabled via invoke command, enter PS session, these typical commandlets for remoting about what right now was WinRM. And we now do that with SSH, and we will see that in a few seconds if that will work out. So again, I don't have that in the full CLR. I need to do it here. So take care. I do use -hostname. That's the difference. You need to know that. Hostname is SSH remoting. So, and then I can use the name of my Linux box, the user. I apologize for using root and administrator. So, but it still doesn't work. Have you seen that? It doesn't work. The main reason is simply you do not need PowerShell Core on Windows alone. You need PowerShell Core on either side. So there is the third step that I have to take. I installed OpenSSH on Windows. I installed PowerShell Core on Windows. And the third step is mandatory. I install PowerShell Core on Linux. So you will see that. So, problem is, Ubuntu long-term servicing branch doesn't have PowerShell. Yes. What a shame. So let's see how that can be fixed. I prepped some scripts. This is exactly what you find in the download folder. And what I do now is that I, first of all, have to find out where can I get PowerShell. And using a Debian or Ubuntu Linux, you want to have a repository. So you can use apt-get install or something like that. But there is nothing in the repository from Ubuntu. So I have to add a repository from Microsoft. And this is exactly what I'm doing. It's gone really fast, I know that, but if I would do it slower, then you have to stay here since 8 o'clock. So I apologize for that, but try that out on your own. So what I do now is that I added a repository. There is a folder in Ubuntu, and that's it. You want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind you that there's a blog article that describes the steps for any distribution that you might have, how to install those repositories on the Linux.
Then I do need to do some fancy upget, update, upget something stuff. And then PowerShell core is installed. And if I may give you a tip, take care what version is installed. You will see that in a second, I believe. I just tried that, so let's see. Yeah. And now it's installing. So it needs a few seconds. PowerShell core is a bit larger in terms of megabyte. And now it's installing. And now I have PowerShell core. So actually, the desired situation is that you want to have a distribution that provides PowerShell itself. If you don't have, you need to add a repository. So, did you see it doesn't work? I have PowerShell, but there's still something missing. The final step that is not done automatically is you need to prep the SSHD config. And this is the most important stuff. SSHD needs to know when you come with a PowerShell and you want to connect to the remote box, it needs to know which subsystem should be started. So I need to add this line of code, subsystem PowerShell with a path to the executable. I need to restart the servers, and then it should work. Once again, the password, that's it. So, only problem is, you will see that now. Which version does it install? It was a bit fast there. So, let's find out. But just one quick side note. You see that I go back to my Windows configuration. I just changed the SSHD config. So if I want to go the other way around, I need an SSHD config on my Windows system also. And this is done by either configuring the SSHD config or by setting this registry keys. So I did that, and now let's see if that worked out and if we see which version we have. So again, this is 6.1.0 something preview. Installed by default is what I would refer to as a beta software. It might be stable and you might love it. But in terms of a production system, I do not want that. I want the stable one, 6.02. And this is the reason why I remove PowerShell again. And I take a look. If Microsoft provides a repository with the stable versions, or the version that I want to have, and you will see that I will find something. You see apt cache medicine. This is the command that you do use, and you see that they, when I do this right now, they provide 4 different versions. And now I chose the one that's desired. I install it. And now you will see I have the stable one. So, what I'm doing here is not meant to be understood line by line right now. It's just a demonstration of the whole process. And there are some sophisticated steps from my perspective. And you really should take care to understand what you're doing there. So grab this demo code, or there are other ways. You might prefer another distribution. You might prefer another way. There are Docker images for that. So go your way, without a doubt. So now, one last try, going back to Linux from the Windows machine. And you see, this is the version that I want. Now I'm complete. I do use the same PowerShell core version on Linux, and I do the same version on Windows. And there are plenty of steps, I can tell you. So, if you see this, the question is, am I missing something? Are you lucky with that?
Well, it's SSH, right? So why would you type a password?
Passwordless login would be nice, right? There is no need to watch this if you ever used more than 5 minutes on Linux, because you know that it's exactly the same. Okay, the path a little bit different. So I'm on a Windows machine again, and I do use now SSH keygen, same commands that you use on Linux, and I will create a key pair. That's it. And I have to push the public key. That's the part that needs the server side, because I want to authenticate as myself. So I need the private key to say, it's me. So I push it to the other side, and I use SCP, secure copy. This is also included, this full OpenSSH. And yeah, right now I need password, of course, because it's not yet in place. And the final step is that on the Linux box, I simply have to move it. First of all, it needs a proper directory. Then I have to move it there and rename it to authorized keys. I guess many people know that. That's it. And it needs a certain right structure, a certain access right. You will see that again here. I'm doing this with change mod 600, and that's it. And that's exactly the same things that you already did when you used to work with Linux. So let's find out if it works. I give you my identity, this is my private key.
By the way, I wouldn't recommend doing that in production, putting your key like that in the root. You probably don't want people to just be able to just access your root account like that.
And it's definitely best practice to use root and administrator. Okay. Hope you heard the irony. Yeah. So, and the last thing that I do here is now, it's uncomfortable if you always have to give -i and the name of the key. So there is an agent on Windows. We installed that. That was the second service. And you have to give the agent the key. That's it. And I do it here. And now the agent takes control of my identity. And it's just as comfortable as having a carrier's ticket and just go in on a file share to another box. You will see that now because, have you seen, no password login on PowerShell either. It's really that simple. So, I apologize for cheating a little bit and doing it that quick, that the timetable doesn't allow that. But this is real, this is not nothing cheating. This is what I did last week to test it, and this is exactly the way you do. So, the main thing, and Bartek will tell you in 5 minutes a little bit more, the main thing is what you're going to do with that stuff. So, let's try that out. First of all, I'm using Visual Studio Code. Why didn't I do that in the past? There are some tiny glitches with a console application. Try that on your own. I don't say anything, it's not perfect. I can recommend the Windows subsystem for Linux, because you have the full-blown SSH from the Linux box. And you will see that a lot of things that do not work out super great work better in Windows subsystem for Linux. Feel free to even use PuTTY or whatsoever you like, because it's up to you what you want to do. If you want to have some interaction between the machines, then PowerShell and PowerShell remoting and stuff like implicit remoting, that's your friend. So let's find out what you can do now. I call it the Wild West because I don't want to ask Jeffrey now, maybe later in the Q&A. What's the use of PowerShell in Linux? Can I add some users? No. There is no new local user or stuff like that. You can create one. But the things that you do, generally spoken, is that, first of all, you think about what do you need on data on the Linux box. And maybe you need a routing table. So let's see if that works. There is something like netstat. I try that out first, because you use that very, very often. If I use netstat to create a routing table, you know that this is not the same as select object, format table, this is strings. And if I want to create objects from that strings, that's a little bit sophisticated because I need to get rid of the white spaces, and I have to create objects from that data. So more or less, that is what we generally do in Windows when we have no other chance. The least thing that we do. So I try that here. You need to see all the sessions from, for example, Matthias with the regular expression stuff. You have to watch that all. You have to read the books to find out how that works. In this case, I just look for one or multiple white spaces and I remove it and replace it via this way with commas. And then you see we get objects. And the final step is that you can, for example, find a single object, and if that suits your needs, great. Would I type that in? No. Would I create a function? Yes. So if this is necessary or useful for you, you can do that. Second example, I got 3 of them, and we will find out there is more. The second thing is, if you're used to use LSOF on Linux to list the open files, there's a bunch of stuff, but you can't really, it's not easy finding data here, because you have to use grep. Again, you need to have regular expressions in your mind, and it's just a ton of stuff. And maybe you are the one in the company that knows that, but there are other colleagues that want to use it in a simpler way. So one way to get rid of that is that we again create a structured data. And at the end, what you see here, I'm capable of grouping objects, sorting objects, and I think this is a pretty good example. I would not know how I can do it that easy in quote unquote on Linux. Now I have a table, as we use that very often in Windows, with the top users and their open file handles. So I got one thing more, just in case you need a config file. Everything is text in Linux, just as it is in Unix. And you see, the MIME types is pretty bad. There are empty lines, and beyond that, on the right-hand side, the file extensions are, sometimes they do not exist, sometimes 1, sometimes 2. What I want to have is a table with 2 rows, with a MIME type on the left-hand side and the if exist file extension on the other side. So this is a little bit complicated because I have to take care of what you see here marked. I have to take care of the fact that I do not find white spaces on the right-hand side. So I'm just looking once for white spaces. And again, I need a more or less sophisticated regular expression. To me, this is sophisticated. To some of you, it might be basic level, but you need to have that. And finally, I can use that as an object. So, does that make sense? Maybe. Let's say it like that. Would have Microsoft invented PowerShell just for that? Maybe.
I don't think so.
Maybe. But there is more. And we will find out that. Just a second about the basic stuff. This is extraordinary here, and you need some special knowledge. But what about the basics? Aliases. They do not exist. As I mentioned before, ls, wget, curl, because they exist as real applications. But there is an alias, for example, for set location, cd, although this exists in Unix, which might be for an admin who's not deep in the technique, a bit confusing. So, yeah. So there is a requirement to replace that so that we really can interact with the shell. So, but again, does that make sense? Maybe. I show you one thing that makes sense. What if we would have objects in Linux, or something that is like objects? I want to talk about web services for a little while. So I have to go to my second demo file. I will do that. You now see my last command in line 39. Let's think about what happens if I have kinda objects. So switch to the second one. So Just doing it fine.
OCD kicking in.
The Linux world is changing. We have more and more, we use web services. Think of Docker, think of, I don't know, so many things. And I use that plain, that simple example that I used to show on my PowerShell workshops. What is a web service? Yeah, for example, you want to change money, you're from outside the European Union, or you want to travel to the US, and you need to know some exchange rates. So get it from the European Central Bank, that's it. I'm doing that live here, querying the servers, and I get some data structure. And just because it's XML, to me it's a bit confusing. The XML ninjas laugh about that, but I think it's a little bit confusing. But if you try, okay, then finally, cube, you find the necessary data. And of course, XML is a string. So this is why Linux has no problem processing this. But you can create an object from that very, very easily. And by using invoke web request and putting that in that data structure, you already have objects. And now you can find, with that 3 lines of code, what is the exchange rate for the euro compared to US dollar. One more example. You may think that currencies, real currencies, are boring, so I have one more thing. What about cryptography? What about Bitcoin and stuff, cryptocurrencies? Same thing. Lots of these exchanges provide a REST API, and I can do that again. But the primary advantage here is that they do deliver JSON. If you see that, I could have also used invoke ref method. I just did it here for demo purposes. You will see invoke ref method in a minute. And what you see now is that we grab the data from a bitcoincharts.com website who provides an API. And now you can get all the stuff that they provide, and you see the exchange rates. So, but I'm used to work with Kraken. I don't know how that is pronounced, Kraken. And I'm only interested in the exchange rates on my provider. So I limit the output to what is exchanged on Kraken, and you will see I get a beautiful output, and I see what is the current state of the Bitcoin on Kraken exchange compared to euro. The only thing, it doesn't look as nice as it could be, because you might have heard of calculated properties. I can beautify it, and this is exactly the same thing that I do on Windows, and it looks a bit weird, I guess, but to the professionals here in the room, no problem. You will find out that's great. So let's see that. And now it's beautiful. So, and I'm almost done, but one maybe funny thing left so that you don't fall asleep because of all that letters and numbers. Some people do have a lot of spare time, I think, so there's one guy who created an API with Twitter quotes from the American president. This is one of my funniest examples I know. I really encourage you to use that. There's always a laugh in a classroom. You will see people like that. You can query a random quote. There's a complete API. You can say, tell me everything that the president said, referring Hillary Clinton. It's super funny. You can spend hours. So.
So Thorsten already built up the stage for the REST APIs and generating APIs on Linux. And obviously there are ways in Linux to talk to those APIs, on Python libraries, wherever you fancy. The thing I like about PowerShell when it comes to those APIs is that you not only get the data, but you can also process it easily using just simple tools as where object for each object. So in this case, I just wanted to show you that I'm just trying to connect to the API from the WordPress. I'm just grabbing the data from this API, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how many articles about Linux I actually wrote in my career on this page. Sorry. Can we do something about this feedback, Sumi? Because it's really annoying. Okay. Anyways, as you can see, I can just get this data. There wasn't so many of them, unfortunately. The next off is that during the initial presentation, Tobias showed this QR code. So I want to show you that if something is in a gallery, you don't even have to have Windows to use it, because he made it available for PowerShell Core. I'm on Linux, that's fine. I can just run this code and get exactly the same result he got. So now you will see that I just have this the QR code that represents myself. So if you want to scan it, go ahead. You will find out how to reach me afterwards. So as you can see, just because something was designed in a way that it actually runs on PowerShell Core means that you don't have to worry about which operating system you are sitting on. You can run it as Microsoft Teams says now, on any client. You don't have to worry about which client are you using behind the scenes. It will just work. Next one is, perfect use case for using Linux, PowerShell on Linux, is talking to any cloud providers. Again, because most of the things that they have are exposed as an API, if you produce a commands that talk to these APIs, you can just use them as you would do that on Windows. There's no much difference. The only difference is that here, because it doesn't know which browser you fancy, it will prompt you to, okay, click on this link, I will figure it out, paste whatever you got there, I will connect to the API, and then give you a token that allows you to actually use your Azure account. So I get the prompt from my user. I selected my live ID that I actually use for the Azure. And the moment I click it, I go back to the console. Actually, in this case, it's VS Code console, so it's VS Code in the end. And then I can just work with the resources that I have in Azure. Just like that. I don't have to learn new syntax. Obviously, if you are a Unix person, you probably will use Azure CLI anyway, because it kind of feels natural for you. But for me, that feels natural, so I'll rather go like that. So as you can see, I have a few VMs. I can start one because it's not started. Generally, it's just a GitLab runner that I normally shut down during the night, so I just decided to start it. So the point is, with this one, the previous demo is that you can actually use those cloud providers. So it's not just Azure, because you will find a module for AWS as well. I'm not sure about others because I haven't looked for them, but probably if I would need them, I would be able to find them as well. So next off, authoring. Because for those of you that attended my session yesterday of Mr. Typo, just 10 people or something. Thank you very much for attending anyway. But the point is that the same technology, the same methods to author your modules apply to PowerShell Core. So I can use tab expansion ++. I can author my commands in a way that they actually expose this tab expansion out of the box. I don't have to worry about the versions here, because unlike Windows PowerShell, there's no version of PowerShell without Windows that doesn't support register argument completer or command attribute, attribute completer attribute on the parameter. So as you can see here, I'm actually using classes to define those. All those things just work out of the box on Linux. So if you target Linux, it just works. So you can just specify your class. You can basically create a class that is suited for tab completion. You just define it in your module and it just works. So authoring doesn't really change regardless if you were working off PowerShell Core on Windows, PowerShell Core on Linux, or Windows PowerShell version 5.0 and above. So all those things kind of work similar, and as you can see the code, It's not really different code. I didn't write it specifically for Linux. I just copied the module that I wrote for Windows PowerShell to my Linux box, and because I don't use anything fancy there, that it's just suited for Windows only, so like SimMuttets or something like that, it just works on Linux. Next off, well, the good thing about PowerShell, not Windows PowerShell, but PowerShell, is that it's an open source project. I actually, to be honest, if I would have to grade those two things, PowerShell on Linux or PowerShell being open source wins any day of the week. Reason? Well, first of all, we can now create an issue, and if the issue doesn't get enough love, there are members of community that will pick it up and fix it for us. There are also members of community that actually change PowerShell in a way that I love it. So this is actually a pull request from Matthias. You probably know him very well. He thought that the fact that we don't have much evaluator as a parameter for replace operator is just waste of potential. So what he did was actually he wrote the code that creates this option. So now you can do C replace, take your regular expression and a script block that represents your match evaluator and do something fancy with the results of your match. That's something that is possible in PowerShell 6. It's not possible in PowerShell 5.1. Forgive me for any blunder because it was a longer day and my tongue is kind of just dying on me. So that's the beauty of PowerShell, because nobody in the PowerShell team probably thought about it. Maybe they did, but they didn't have time for that. But there was some members of community, like Matthias, that thought, okay, wow, man, this would be awesome to have it. So instead of whining about it, that Microsoft doesn't do that, he just committed to that, wrote the code, made the tests, created a pull request, got it approved, got it merged, and now we can all benefit from it. Thank you, Matthias. That's the demo that I want to show you, where we actually stick to the native Linux tools and expose our Windows gods to the Linux folks without asking them to install PowerShell at all. So first off, I create an API, and I call this API, this is using universal dashboard, so I get the processes, I get single process, it's kind of going pretty fast, but you will be able to watch it later, I guess. Then I filter it on the name of the process, then I just start to create processes. So I start a notepad, then I will just take a look at this notepad process, how it does it look like. I can kill it, well, if you do it like this, as you can see, I don't really put any credentials. Well, you probably don't want to expose like full access to your system like this. So if I try to just get the DSC configuration from this box, it tells, nah, no, sorry, I cannot really do that because you're not administrator. But combining this with GIA actually makes it possible, because now what is actually happening, I'm not sure if I can show you the code, maybe I'll try to do that later, but generally what happens is that when you are talking to this endpoint, you are actually connecting as a non-privileged user. Therefore, you won't be able to do anything on this box. But this non-privileged user is actually allowed to connect to GIA endpoint on the same box. And by doing that, the person is able to actually get this information. Obviously, I restricted it so that it cannot, for example, start DSC configuration or like set LCM. I don't want that. But I want to expose this ability to test DSC configuration, and those things like universal dashboard and Polaris and other API providing tools are actually growing and getting smarter with every edition. So now you can actually authenticate against them and make it even better, because then you can just ask for like some kind of OI or auth token to make this possible, not just like without providing anything at all. And last but certainly not least, what I wanted to show you here is that universal dashboard was written in a way that is actually now running on PowerShell core. So I don't really have to just talk to it. I can actually run it on my Linux boxes as well. So just use PowerShell on Linux to create web APIs. I mean, I'm not saying that's the best choice that you have, but at least you have this choice. So if you've written the code that exposes some information about your service, you can run it both on Windows and Linux just fine. It just allows you to see any information you want. This one is actually coming from the examples that you have in the Universal Dashboard repo, so I didn't enroll myself, I'm not that smart, but as you can see, it gives you a pretty nice overview of what server is doing. Let me just try to change a bit to the code. Because what I wanted to show you, okay, so this is how the dashboard looks. Oh, no, that is not how it looks. Normally, let's just open it in editor that understands PowerShell a bit. It can be Notepad++, I don't mind. So that's basically what I did to have this endpoint. So I have one for the processes, so I can see them. I can see them by name, by ID. I can stop them. So this is where delete kicks in. I can, again, stop them by ID or the name, and I can also create a process using start process. And in the end, for the end user, it means that he or she has to just post the path to the file that I want to start. So all those things, are, as you can see, are just defined in a pretty small PowerShell script. And the thing that I wanted to show you here as well is that that's where I call this GIA endpoint to actually be able to, from non-privileged account, to elevate and do something as an admin locally. And that is actually defined in the, first of all, I have my configuration document. Let's try to use Notepad++ again for that. It should be better than anything else. I can use Visual Studio Code as well. I'm not that religious to avoid it like a plague. I should probably avoid it as a plague. Okay, let's just open it where I can actually see it and show you what I mean. Yes. So, because that's very simple, I just say session type, you obviously have to have a restricted remote server. If you don't do that for your GIA endpoints, you should be, no, okay, I won't go that far. You should rethink what you do. Wanted to say something more drastic. Run as virtual account, probably a good idea in this case because I just don't want to create a GMSA just to be able to run something locally as an admin. And I just allowed my wife account, because why not, to just at least run this capability works. And this is in the fake module because that's how they did it. You don't really have to have real module, you just have something that looks like module. And when you have it, then you can specify what modules you want to import. So in this case, I just want to PSD configuration to be present. And the only command I make available to this GIA endpoint is this test DSC configuration. In reality, I will probably just create my own module that kind of exposes the commands that I wrote. So like probably kind of proxy functions that are doing something smart and probably limiting what you can do. But generally, you can do that. So you have the GIA endpoint running on your box. You allow some API calls, and API calls are not running as elevated. So even somebody like kind of hooks into something and just try to steal your stuff, you're actually attacking your golden nuggets. You're kind of safe because GIA is pretty good at securing stuff. And with that,
so there's so much more, but not today. So we will finish now. We have to take a choice. We took that. We just want to mention there is so much more. It's Azure Shell, Azure Cloud Shell. You might have seen that. You can choose between PowerShell or Bash. Microsoft is running more and more Linux. Amazing, but we are used to that already. Originally, I want to talk about LCOW, which is a pretty interesting topic, but it wouldn't fit here in terms of timing, of course. And the only thing that I want you to know is that if you'd like to give us some feedback on what you're interested, maybe we find some time next conference. My final tip is here. WSL is pretty interesting, pretty easy, but it doesn't provide the PowerShell experience. You saw that here. So my final comment to that, when I started, I said, why do I use Ubuntu 16.04? Not everything is perfect. PowerShell Core is currently not supported on the current Ubuntu because Ubuntu removed some libraries that are required by PowerShell. And so you run into this kind of problems you would avoid. If you're an average Windows administrator, maybe this is a good starting point. The Raspberry Pi is an even better one, but you know that. So it can be very confusing. Grab the code, hope you like it. And famous last words from Joey Yellow. So our last question is, did we match?
I think we did.
At least a bit. So thank you for coming. I'm very sorry that we took away the time for questions just to talk, but as you might know, we are here and you might find us outside and tomorrow. So we really appreciate that you took your time in the evening. Thank you.